I thought this summer would be simple, a job that paid just enough, a chance to escape the city, and the promise of fresh air in Yellowstone. The bus ride had been long, but when I stepped down onto the cracked pavement near the ranger station, the forest swallowed me whole. Towering pines stretched so high they seemed to scrape the sky, their shadows falling across the dirt road like dark fingers. The air was thick with the scent of resin and damp soil, a perfume that should have been comforting, but instead pressed down on me like a weight. At first, I tried to convince myself it was peaceful. No traffic, no voices, no chaos, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that calms you. It was the kind that unsettles, the kind that makes you realize something is missing. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was swallowing sound. My footsteps echoed strangely, heavy and deliberate, as though the ground wanted to remember each one. The ranger station sat ahead, a squat wooden building with peeling paint and a radio antenna jutting upward like a skeletal finger. I should have felt relief at the sight of it, but instead I felt watched. The trees pressed close, their trunks lined like sentinels, and I couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes tracking me from the shadows. Every time I turned my head, I saw nothing but bark and branches, yet the feeling lingered. I adjusted my backpack and forced myself forward. This was just nerves, I told myself. A new job, a new environment. Of course it felt strange. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just nerves. The silence wasn't natural. It was intentional. The forest wasn't welcoming me. It was testing me. Inside the station, I signed the paperwork, my pen scratching loudly against the paper in the oppressive quiet. Even here, surrounded by walls, the silence seeped in. I caught myself holding my breath, listening for something, anything that would break it. Nothing came. As I stepped back outside, the sun dipped lower, staining the treetops gold. For a moment, the beauty almost convinced me I was safe. But then the shadows lengthened and the silence deepened, and I realized the forest had already decided I didn't belong here. The ranger station smelled of old wood and coffee gone stale. Inside, 2 veteran rangers waited, their uniforms faded from years of sun and rain. They greeted me with polite nods, voices calm, almost rehearsed, as though they had repeated this orientation countless times. At first, it felt ordinary, rules, schedules, safety protocols. But the longer they spoke, the more I noticed the tension in their eyes. "Never leave the tower at night," one said firmly, his tone clipped. "Avoid the northern trails. Check in every hour on the radio. No exceptions." I scribbled notes, trying to mask my unease. These rules sounded more like warnings than guidelines. The second ranger leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This forest doesn't forgive mistakes. It remembers." His words hung in the air, heavy, unsettling. I asked why the northern trails were off limits. He hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Too dangerous, terrain shifts, easy to get lost. But his explanation felt incomplete, like a cover for something darker. They handed me a map, its edges worn, certain areas marked with thick red ink. "Stay clear of these zones," the first ranger insisted. "If you hear anything unusual, don't investigate. Report it. Stay inside." The silence between their sentences was louder than their words. I could hear the faint hum of the radio on the desk, static breaking through occasionally, as if the forest itself was listening. I nodded, pretending confidence, but inside my chest a knot tightened. These weren't ordinary safety rules. They were survival instructions. As the orientation ended, one ranger placed a hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, almost desperate. "Remember," he whispered, "the forest doesn't want you here. Respect it, or it will take you." I stepped outside, the weight of their words pressing down on me. The trees loomed taller, shadows stretching longer. The rules echoed in my mind, each one less like guidance and more like a warning carved into stone. The tower was supposed to feel safe. Elevated above the tree line with its narrow windows and heavy door, it looked like a fortress against the wilderness. But when the sun dropped and the forest turned black, safety became an illusion. I sat alone, the radio crackling faintly beside me, the logbook open, pen ready for hourly check-ins. At first, the night was calm. The wind brushed against the tower, wood creaked softly, and the distant outline of mountains glowed faintly under the moon. I told myself this was what I had come for: solitude, quiet, the kind of silence city life never allowed. But then the silence shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. I leaned forward, straining to hear. A faint sound drifted through the window, like whispers carried on the wind. At first, I dismissed it. The forest was full of tricks, branches rubbing, air funneling through narrow spaces. But the sound grew rhythmic, deliberate, almost conversational. My skin prickled. The whispers weren't random. They rose and fell like voices speaking in patterns, too soft to understand, but too structured to ignore. I checked the radio, hoping for interference, but the static was clean. The sound wasn't coming from the equipment, it was coming from outside. I pressed my forehead against the glass, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No lanterns, no figures, no animals, just black trees swaying slightly. Yet the whispers persisted, circling the tower, weaving through the night air. I tried to laugh it off, muttering to myself, "It's just the wind." But the words felt hollow. The forest didn't echo them back. Instead, the whispers grew louder, closer, until I could swear they were right beneath the tower. I gripped the logbook, my pen trembling. The rules echoed in my mind: never leave the tower at night. I understood why now. Whatever was out there wanted me to step outside, to follow the sound. Minutes stretched into hours. Each check-in felt mechanical, my voice shaking as I reported, "All clear." But it wasn't clear. The forest was speaking, and I was the only one listening. By dawn, the whispers faded, dissolving into the morning breeze as if they had never existed. But I knew better. The forest had spoken to me, and silence would never sound the same again. The forest had always been quiet, but that night the silence became something else entirely. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the devouring of it. Every noise I made seemed to vanish before it could fully exist. My boots pressed into the dirt, yet the crunch of gravel dissolved into nothing. Even the creak of the tower's wooden steps faded as though swallowed by the air. I paused, listening hard, waiting for the familiar chorus of night creatures. Nothing answered. No owl, no cricket, not even the distant rustle of leaves. The silence was so complete it felt alive, pressing against my ears, filling my lungs, choking me with its weight. I tried to hum, just to break it. The tune died instantly, clipped short, as if the forest refused to let it linger. My own voice betrayed me, vanishing into the void. I whispered my name, testing the rule I'd been warned about. The sound didn't echo. It didn't carry. It simply ceased. The path ahead seemed endless, a tunnel of trees stretching into blackness. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. The silence followed, clinging, consuming. I realized then that the forest wasn't just quiet, it was hungry. It wanted sound, and it wanted mine. I reached a clearing, moonlight spilling across the ground. For a moment, I thought the silence would break, but the light only deepened it, illuminating the emptiness. My breath came fast, ragged, but even that was stolen, muffled before it could escape. Panic clawed at me. I turned back toward the tower, desperate for the faint hum of the radio, the scrape of a chair, anything human. The silence resisted, stretching, pulling, as if the forest itself wanted me to stay. When I finally reached the tower door, I slammed it shut behind me. The sound should have echoed, sharp and final. Instead, it was gone, erased before it could exist. I leaned against the wall, trembling, realizing the truth. The forest didn't just consume sound, it consumed presence. I wasn't just unheard, I was unseen. And in that moment, I understood. The silence was not emptiness. It was the forest itself, watching, waiting, deciding whether I belonged. The veteran ranger found me outside the tower just before dusk, his face lined with years of exposure to the elements. His uniform was faded, his boots worn, but his eyes carried something heavier than time, fear disguised as wisdom. He motioned for me to sit on the steps, the forest stretching behind him like a wall of shadows. "You're new," he said quietly, his voice low, almost swallowed by the air. "So listen carefully. Don't let the forest know you." I frowned, unsure if he was joking. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, his breath carrying the bitter scent of coffee and tobacco. "Names matter here. If the forest hears your name, it remembers. And once it remembers, it doesn't let go." The words struck me harder than I expected. I tried to laugh, but the sound felt hollow, quickly consumed by the silence around us. He didn't laugh back. His gaze stayed fixed on the tree line, as though something was watching from within. "You think this is just a job," he continued, "but this place, it's alive. It listens, it waits. The rules we gave you aren't just protocol, they're survival. Break them and you'll vanish like the others." The mention of others sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask, but his expression warned me not to. Instead, I stared at the trees, their branches swaying slightly, though no wind touched my skin. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, its cover frayed, pages yellowed. Scribbled inside were notes, names, dates, warnings. Some names were crossed out, others circled. "These were rookies like you," he said, tapping the paper. "Some thought the forest was beautiful. Some thought it was harmless. They all thought they were safe. They were wrong." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing into me. "So, what do I do?" He closed the notebook, sliding it back into his jacket. "Stay quiet. Follow the rules. Never speak your name aloud. And if you hear it whispered back to you, don't answer." The silence around us deepened, as if the forest itself was listening to his warning. My pulse quickened, and I realized the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the trees had leaned closer. The veteran ranger stood, his movements slow, deliberate. "You'll think I'm crazy," he said, almost to himself. "But when the forest calls, you'll understand, and by then, it might be too late." He walked away, leaving me alone on the steps. The shadows stretched longer, the silence pressed harder, and his words echoed in my mind. "Don't let the forest know you." The creek ran shallow that morning, its surface broken by scattered stones and the occasional ripple of current. I followed the path down, hoping the sound of water would ease the tension that had been building since my first night in the tower. But when I reached the bank, I froze. Imprinted in the mud were tracks, large circular depressions, each marked with 5 thin grooves radiating outward like claws. They weren't deer prints, nor bear, nor anything I had ever seen. The spacing was wrong, the depth unnatural, as if whatever had made them carried a weight far heavier than its size suggested. I crouched low, tracing the outline with my fingers. The mud was fresh, damp, meaning the creature had passed recently. My pulse quickened. I glanced around, scanning the trees, but the forest stood still, silent, as though holding its breath. The tracks formed a pattern, not random wandering. They looped in a wide arc, then doubled back toward the creek, circling the stones as if studying them. It felt deliberate, purposeful, like intelligence at work. I snapped a photo with my phone, though the image looked distorted, the grooves less defined than they appeared in person. I measured the stride, longer than a man's, yet too narrow for an animal of bulk. Something had walked here, something that didn't belong. The silence pressed harder. Even the creek's babble seemed muted, swallowed by the air. I remembered the veteran's warning, "Don't let the forest know you." But what if it already did? What if these tracks were proof? I followed them a short distance, heart pounding. They led into the undergrowth, vanishing where the soil hardened. But the impression lingered, as if the forest itself had erased the evidence. I stood there, staring at the empty ground, feeling watched. A twig snapped behind me. I spun, but nothing moved. No animal, no person. Just trees, endless and indifferent. Yet I couldn't shake the certainty that something had been there, just beyond sight. I backed away, returning to the creek. The tracks seemed to pulse in the mud, darker now, as though the earth wanted to remember them. I scribbled notes in my logbook, size, depth, spacing. But no description could capture the wrongness of what I had seen. By the time I climbed back toward the tower, the sun had dipped lower, shadows stretching across the trail. The forest felt heavier, more aware. I carried the image of those tracks with me, etched into my mind. They weren't just signs of movement, they were a message. The forest wasn't empty, it was occupied. And whatever lived here wanted me to know it had passed by. The radio was supposed to be our lifeline. Every ranger, every tower, every patrol, an hourly check-in kept us tethered together across the vast wilderness. That night, the static hummed as usual. The clock ticked past the hour, and I waited for the familiar voice of Ranger Collins. But it never came. I tapped the receiver, adjusted the dial, listening for interference. Nothing. Just silence, broken occasionally by faint bursts of static. I called his name, my voice trembling slightly. No response. The forest swallowed the sound whole. Protocol demanded patience. Sometimes signals dropped, sometimes batteries failed. But as the minutes stretched into half an hour, unease settled in. The veteran ranger's warning echoed in my mind. Don't let the forest know you. What if Collins had? I logged the missed check-in, my handwriting shaky. The station felt colder, the silence heavier. I tried again. Collins, report. Still nothing. By midnight, the other rangers began to notice. Voices crackled across the radio, each one asking the same question. Has anyone heard from Tower 3? The answers were all the same. No. We organized a search at dawn. I volunteered, though dread gnawed at me. The trail to Tower 3 was narrow, winding through dense pines. The forest seemed to lean closer with every step, branches clawing at my shoulders, shadows stretching unnaturally long. When we reached the tower, the door stood ajar. Inside, the logbook lay open, pen resting across the page. The last entry was incomplete, half a sentence cut off mid-word. The radio sat on the desk, still humming faintly, but no one was there. We searched the surrounding area, calling his name, but the forest gave nothing back. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. It was as if Collins had simply ceased to exist. One ranger muttered, "The forest took him." No one corrected him. I lingered by the logbook, staring at the unfinished line. The handwriting was hurried, jagged, as though he had been interrupted. My chest tightened. Interrupted by what? We returned to the station in silence, each step heavier than the last. The absence of Collins was louder than any sound. His missing voice became part of the forest's silence, absorbed, consumed. That night, I sat in my tower, staring at the radio. Every burst of static felt like a whisper, every silence like a warning. I realized then that the forest didn't just consume sound, it consumed people. And once it did, there was no trace left behind. The drawer in the ranger tower wasn't supposed to hold anything more than spare pens and log sheets. But when I pulled it open, my fingers brushed against something soft, worn with age. A notebook. Its leather cover was cracked, edges frayed, the kind of object that had been handled too many times by hands that trembled. I hesitated before opening it. The silence in the tower pressed against me, as though the forest itself waited to see if I would read. Finally, I flipped the cover. Inside, the pages were filled with hurried handwriting, uneven lines, smudged ink, words written as if the author had been racing against time. The entries weren't ordinary logs. They weren't about patrols or weather. They were warnings. Don't let it hear you. Never answer when it calls. The watchers are patient. Each phrase carried the weight of desperation, as though the writer had been trying to leave behind a map for survival. I turned to another page, a list of names. Some were crossed out, others circled. The circled ones had notes beside them. Last seen near the northern trail. Radio silent. Taken. My stomach tightened. These weren't just rangers. They were people who had vanished, their absence recorded in ink because the forest had erased them everywhere else. The deeper I read, the more the journal felt alive. The words seemed to pulse, the ink darker than it should have been, as though the forest itself had seeped into the paper. One entry chilled me. It doesn't want us here. It never did. The silence is its language. The rules are its traps. I closed the book quickly, my hand shaking. But the silence didn't ease. It pressed harder, heavier, as if the forest disapproved of me uncovering its secrets. I shoved the journal back into the drawer, but the words clung to me. Watchers, taken, don't answer. They echoed in my mind, louder than the static on the radio. That night, as I sat in the tower, I couldn't stop thinking about the author. Who had written it? What had happened to them? Were they one of the names crossed out, or had they vanished without even that final mark? The forest outside seemed darker, thicker. Every shadow felt like a watcher. Every whisper of wind carried the weight of a name I hadn't spoken. The day had been long, filled with patrols and uneasy silence, but it was the evening that unsettled me most. Dusk in Yellowstone should have been brief, a soft fade from gold to gray, a natural transition into night. Instead, it stretched unnaturally, as though the sun refused to surrender, yet the shadows insisted on advancing. The treetops glowed with a lingering amber light, but beneath them the forest was already drowning in darkness. It felt like two worlds colliding, the sky clinging to day, the ground surrendering to night. I stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the horizon, and realized the twilight wasn't fading, it was expanding. Minutes passed, then hours, yet the dusk held. My watch ticked forward, but the light remained the same, dim, oppressive, endless. The silence deepened, pressing against my ears, and I understood that time itself was bending. The forest wasn't following the rules of nature. It was writing its own. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the ground like grasping fingers. They climbed the trunks, wrapped around branches, and seemed to breathe. I tried to convince myself it was an illusion, the tricks of fading light, but the air grew colder, heavier, as though the forest was inhaling. I whispered into the radio, reporting my position, but the static swallowed my words. No response came. I was alone, suspended in a twilight that refused to end. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate, a voice, faint but clear, calling from the tree line. It wasn't my name, not yet, but it was something close, something familiar. I froze, heart pounding, the veteran's warning echoing in my mind. Don't let the forest know you. The voice repeated, closer now, weaving through the stretched dusk. I backed toward the tower, every step heavy, the silence clinging tighter. The light above dimmed further, but it didn't vanish. It lingered, unnatural, as though the forest wanted me trapped in this endless in-between. By the time I reached the tower door, the twilight still hadn't broken. Night refused to fall, day refused to return. I realized then that dusk wasn't a transition here, it was a state, a threshold the forest controlled. Inside, I sat trembling, staring out the window. The horizon glowed faintly, the shadows writhed, and the silence consumed everything. The forest had stretched time itself, holding me hostage in its endless dusk. The map the rangers had given me carried a thick red slash across one narrow path. Beside it, in block letters, the words, "Do not enter." At first, I thought it was just another safety precaution, like the warnings about unstable terrain or bear activity. But the way the ink bled into the paper, heavy and deliberate, made it feel less like a guideline and more like a command. Curiosity gnawed at me. The forest had already shown me its silence, its strange tracks, its endless dusk. What could possibly lie beyond a trail so forbidden it had to be marked in red? I waited until late afternoon, when the light was dim but not yet gone. My boots crunched against the gravel as I approached the trailhead. The air shifted immediately, colder, thicker, as though I had stepped into a different atmosphere. The trees leaned closer, their branches tangled like skeletal arms. The path itself was narrow, winding into shadows that seemed deeper than the rest of the forest. I hesitated, remembering the veteran's warning, "Don't let the forest know you." But the silence pressed harder, and I felt as though the forest wanted me to choose, obey the rule or break it. I stepped forward. The trail swallowed me. The sounds of the main path vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating quiet. My breath echoed unnaturally. Each inhale and exhale clipped short, consumed by the air. The ground beneath me felt wrong, too soft, too deliberate, as if it had been shaped by something other than nature. After a few minutes, I noticed markings along the trees. Not carvings, not scratches, but impressions, as though the bark itself had been molded into symbols. They twisted and spiraled, unfamiliar shapes that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. I reached out to touch one, but the bark recoiled beneath my fingers, alive, breathing. The silence deepened. My pulse thundered in my ears, but even that sound felt stolen, muffled before it could fully exist. I realized then that the trail wasn't just forbidden, it was designed to erase, to consume. I turned back, panic rising, but the path behind me had shifted. The trees had closed in, the trail narrower, unfamiliar. The forest was rearranging itself, trapping me. I forced myself forward, desperate to find an opening. The symbols grew denser, the air colder, until finally I stumbled into a clearing. At its center stood a stone, tall and jagged, covered in the same spiraling marks. The silence here was absolute, crushing, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I backed away, heart racing, and fled the trail. When I finally burst back onto the main path, the air felt lighter, the silence less suffocating. But the forest had made its point. The trail wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous. It was forbidden because it belonged to something else, something that didn't want to be found. The tower had always felt like a fragile refuge, a wooden shell raised above the forest floor. But that night, the illusion of safety shattered. It began with a faint vibration, subtle enough that I thought it was the wind. The door rattled once, softly, as though someone had brushed against it. I froze, pen hovering above the logbook, ears straining. Then it came again, louder, sharper. The hinges groaned, the wood shuddered. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew the rules, never leave the tower at night. But what about when the night came to me? I crept toward the door, each step deliberate, careful not to make noise. The silence outside was absolute, yet the rattling persisted, rhythmic, purposeful. It wasn't random. Something was testing the barrier. I pressed my palm against the wood. The vibrations pulsed through it, steady like a heartbeat. I whispered into the radio. Tower 2 reporting disturbance. Static answered. No voices, no reassurance. Just the forest's silence, swallowing my words. The rattling grew violent. The door shook in its frame, the lock straining. I backed away, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the trembling wood. Shadows flickered across the window, shapes too vague to define. I thought of Collins, the ranger who had vanished. His last log entry cut short. Had his tower door rattled too? Had he opened it? The veteran's warning echoed in my mind. Don't let the forest know you. I clamped my mouth shut, refusing to speak, refusing to give it anything. Minutes stretched into eternity. The door rattled, paused, rattled again. Each silence between strikes was worse than the noise, a waiting, a listening. I imagined unseen hands pressing against the wood, unseen eyes peering through the cracks. Finally, the rattling stopped. The tower fell into stillness, the silence heavier than before. I waited, muscles tense, afraid to move. When dawn broke, the door stood intact, the lock unbroken. But the wood bore marks, thin grooves etched into its surface, spiraling patterns like those I had seen on the forbidden trail. I touched them, and the wood felt warm, as though something had pressed against it all night. The forest hadn't tried to break in. It had tried to be remembered. The forest was supposed to be alive with creatures, deer grazing at dawn, birds weaving songs through the branches, squirrels darting across the undergrowth. But what I saw that morning was wrong. The animals were there, yet they weren't themselves. A deer stood at the edge of the clearing, its body rigid, its head tilted unnaturally. Its eyes glowed faintly in the half-light, not reflecting but emitting a dull shimmer, as though something inside was staring out. It didn't move, didn't blink. It only watched. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the sun, but then the birds began. Their calls were out of rhythm, jagged, broken. Instead of melodies, they produced harsh, mechanical notes, repeating the same sound over and over like a malfunctioning machine. The forest's silence had fractured, replaced by a chorus that felt orchestrated, deliberate. I scribbled in my logbook, noting the behavior, but my hand shook. The rules had never mentioned this. The journal's warnings spoke of watchers, of silence, of names, but not of animals behaving like puppets. As I walked the trail, more deer appeared, each one frozen, their heads turning slowly in unison to follow me. Their movements were too synchronized, too precise, as if controlled by a single unseen hand. The birds clustered on branches, wings twitching in patterns, their eyes fixed downward. I realized they weren't watching the forest, they were watching me. The air grew heavier, the silence pressing between the broken calls. I remembered the veteran's words, "The forest doesn't forgive mistakes." What if the animals weren't mistakes at all? What if they were part of the forest's design, its extensions, its messengers? I stopped near the creek, hoping water would drown out the wrongness. Instead, I found tracks, fresh, sharp, circling the stones. The same strange impressions I had seen before, but now accompanied by deer prints. Only the deer nearby hadn't moved. Their prints shouldn't have been there. My chest tightened. The animals weren't just behaving strangely. They were behaving impossibly. I backed toward the tower, every step shadowed by the deer's gaze, every bird call fractured into static. The forest wasn't silent anymore. It was speaking through its creatures, bending them into patterns I couldn't understand. By the time I reached the tower, the deer had vanished, the birds gone. The silence returned, heavier than before, but I knew it wasn't natural. The forest had shown me its puppets, its ability to twist life into something wrong. And I realized then, the animals weren't watching me because they were curious. They were watching me because the forest had told them to. The veteran ranger had always been the anchor. His presence steadied the rest of us. His warnings carried weight. His silence spoke louder than any radio transmission. But one morning, his voice was simply gone. The check-in came late. Static filled the channel, then faded. No reply. At first, the others dismissed it. Equipment failure, a missed call. But I knew better. His words had haunted me since the first night. Don't let the forest know you. Now the forest had taken him. I hiked toward his tower with two others, the trail unusually still. The air felt heavier, the silence thicker, as though the forest anticipated our arrival. When we reached the clearing, the tower stood intact, its door closed, its windows dark. No signs of struggle, no broken lock, just emptiness. Inside, the logbook lay open. His handwriting filled the last page, steady and deliberate, until the final line. It ended mid-sentence. The forest is nothing more. The pen lay across the paper, ink dried as if he had been interrupted mid-thought. We searched the tower. His jacket hung neatly on the hook, his boots by the bed, his radio humming faintly. Everything was in place except him. It was as though he had stepped out for a moment and never returned. The silence pressed harder. I called his name, but the sound dissolved instantly, swallowed before it could carry. The others tried too, voices trembling, but the forest gave nothing back. We circled the tower, scanning the ground. No footprints, no broken branches, no trail leading away. The earth was smooth, undisturbed, as if it had erased him completely. One ranger muttered, "He knew too much." Another whispered, "The forest doesn't forgive." Their words hung heavy, unchallenged. I lingered inside, staring at the unfinished sentence. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. He had tried to leave us a warning, but the forest had silenced him before he could finish. That night, the towers felt emptier. His absence was louder than any sound. The silence became a presence, pressing against us, reminding us that leadership had vanished. The one man who understood the rules was gone, consumed without trace. I sat in my tower, staring at the radio, waiting for his voice to return. It never did. Instead, the static hummed, patterns weaving faintly, almost like whispers. I realized then that the forest hadn't just taken him, it had absorbed him, folded him into its silence. The veteran ranger was gone. His warnings remained, but his presence had been erased. And now, without him, the forest felt closer, hungrier, ready to claim the rest of us. The journal lay open on the desk, its pages trembling slightly in the draft that seeped through the tower's cracks. I had read fragments before, warnings, names, half-finished sentences, but tonight my eyes locked on a single line written in bold, jagged strokes. Do not give the forest your name. It wasn't advice. It wasn't superstition. It was a rule, the final rule. The words pulsed on the page, darker than the rest, as though the ink itself carried weight. I traced the letters with my finger, feeling the grooves press deep into the paper, carved almost violently. Whoever had written it hadn't just wanted to be remembered. They had wanted to be obeyed. I leaned back, the silence pressing harder. Outside, the forest loomed, shadows stretching across the clearing. I thought of the veteran ranger, his warning echoing, "Don't let the forest know you." He had vanished, leaving only unfinished words. Now, the journal confirmed it. The rule wasn't optional. It was survival. I whispered my name under my breath, testing the air. The sound clipped short, swallowed instantly. My chest tightened. The forest had heard. The radio crackled faintly, static weaving into patterns. For a moment, I thought I heard my name buried in the noise, distorted, broken. I snapped the dial off, heart pounding. The silence deepened. I realized then that the forest wasn't just listening, it was waiting, waiting for me to break the rule. I flipped through the journal, searching for more. The entries grew frantic, the handwriting jagged, desperate. It calls in voices you know. It waits for you to answer. Names are doors, don't open them. Each line carried the same warning, repeated, reinforced, until the final page ended abruptly, ink smeared, as though the writer had been silenced mid-sentence. I closed the book, my hands trembling. The tower felt smaller, the walls thinner, the silence heavier. The forest had rules, and this was the last one. I stared out the window, the tree line shifting in the dim light. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, shapes flickered between trunks. I thought I heard footsteps, deliberate, circling. My breath caught. The journal's words echoed in my mind. Do not give the forest your name. I pressed my lips shut, refusing to speak, refusing to let the forest claim me. But deep inside, I knew the silence was already reaching, already testing. The rule wasn't just about survival, it was about surrender. And if I broke it, the forest would know me. And once it knew me, it would never let me go. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the radio. Static hummed faintly, then broke into a familiar cadence. A voice, my own supervisor's, called my name, sharp and clear. Relief surged through me until I realized the radio was off. The sound had come from outside. I froze, staring at the dark tree line. The voice repeated, softer this time, but unmistakable. It wasn't just similar, it was perfect. Every inflection, every pause. The forest had stolen his voice. I remembered the journal's warning. It calls in voices you know. My chest tightened. This was what it meant. The forest didn't whisper randomly. It imitated. It lured. I backed away from the window, refusing to answer. The silence pressed harder, waiting. Then another voice joined. My mother's. Gentle, familiar, impossible. She spoke my childhood nickname, the one no one here could know. My knees weakened. The forest wasn't just imitating, it was reaching into memory, pulling voices from places it shouldn't. The tower door rattled faintly, as if the voices carried weight. I clamped my mouth shut, refusing to respond, refusing to give it what it wanted. But the voices multiplied. Friends, teachers, strangers, all speaking in fragments, weaving together a chorus of familiarity. Each one perfect, each one wrong. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices seeped through, vibrating in my bones. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside, echoing in the silence, filling the air with imitation. The veteran ranger's warning echoed in my mind. Never answer when it calls. I understood now. Answering wasn't just dangerous, it was surrender. To respond was to acknowledge, to open the door the forest wanted. Minutes stretched into hours. The voices circled, repeated, shifted. Sometimes they begged, sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they whispered secrets I had never spoken aloud. The forest wasn't just imitating, it was probing, testing, searching for the sound that would break me. By dawn, the voices faded, dissolving into silence, but the damage was done. I realized the forest didn't need to know me through my name. It could know me through my memories, my connections, my past. The silence that followed was heavier than ever. It wasn't emptiness, it was anticipation. The forest had shown me its trick, and now it waited for me to fail. The radio had always been my lifeline, a fragile thread connecting me to the other towers. But lately, the static wasn't random anymore. It carried rhythm, it carried shape. At first, I thought it was coincidence, bursts of noise forming accidental patterns. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. The static pulsed in sequences, rising and falling like breath. Sometimes it repeated 3 short bursts, then one long. Other times it stretched into a low hum, vibrating through the tower walls. I began to write them down, filling pages with jagged lines and dots. The patterns resembled language, crude but deliberate. The forest wasn't just silent, it was speaking through the static. One night, the bursts aligned with my heartbeat. Every thump of my chest echoed back in the radio, distorted, amplified, as though the forest had synchronized itself with me. My breath caught. I turned the dial, desperate to break the rhythm, but the static followed, adjusting, adapting. I whispered into the receiver, testing. Tower 2, reporting. The static answered, not with words, but with a shift, a ripple, as though acknowledging me. My skin prickled. The forest had heard. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind. Names are doors. Don't open them. What if the static was the key? What if the forest was building a language to call me more clearly? I tried ignoring it, but the patterns grew stronger. They formed shapes in my mind, spirals and symbols like those carved into the forbidden trail. I saw them even when I closed my eyes, etched against the darkness. One sequence repeated endlessly. 3 short bursts, 2 long, then silence. I scribbled it down, staring at the marks. It felt like a question, waiting for an answer. I refused to respond. I shut the radio off, but the silence that followed was worse. The forest pressed harder, heavier, as though punishing me for breaking the connection. By dawn, I turned the radio back on. The static resumed instantly, softer now, almost gentle. It pulsed once, twice, then faded. I realized then that the forest wasn't just speaking, it was listening, testing, waiting. The patterns weren't random interference, they were communication, and the forest had chosen me as its receiver. It began as a shadow, stretched unnaturally across the clearing, too tall, too deliberate to be a trick of dusk. I leaned forward at the tower window, heart pounding, eyes straining against the dim light. The silence pressed harder, thicker, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The figure stood at the edge of the tree line, not moving, not breathing, just watching. Its shape was wrong. Elongated limbs, a head tilted slightly as if listening. The shadows clung to it, refusing to let me see clearly. But I knew it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a ranger. It was something else. I whispered into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2, reporting movement. Static answered. No voices, no reassurance. The forest had cut me off. The figure shifted, slowly, deliberately. Its head turned toward the tower, and though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt them. Heavy, piercing, dragging across my skin. My breath caught. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The watchers are patient. I backed away from the window, but the silence followed, pressing against the walls, filling the air. The figure didn't advance. It didn't retreat. It simply stood, waiting. Minutes stretched into hours. The dusk refused to fade. The shadows refused to break. The watcher remained, unmoving, a sentinel carved from darkness. I tried to distract myself, scribbling notes in the logbook, but my hand shook too violently to write. At one point, I thought I heard my name whispered, faint, carried on the static. I clamped my mouth shut, refusing to answer. The watcher tilted its head further, as though disappointed. The forest seemed to bend around it. The trees leaned closer. The silence deepened. The air grew colder. I realized then that the watcher wasn't just observing, it was measuring, testing, waiting for me to break the rule. By dawn, the figure was gone. No footprints, no broken branches, no trace. The clearing stood empty, the silence lighter, but the memory remained. The watcher had appeared, and though it had vanished, I knew it hadn't left. It was part of the forest now, woven into its silence, waiting for the moment I would falter. The creek had always been my refuge. Its steady trickle was the only sound that seemed immune to the forest's suffocating silence. But that night, even the water betrayed me. I approached the bank under a dim sky, the air heavy, the trees leaning close. The creek shimmered faintly, moonlight breaking across its surface. At first, it sounded normal, soft, rhythmic, alive. Then the cadence shifted. The water began to murmur. I froze, leaning closer. The sound wasn't random. It carried tone, rhythm, almost words. The creek was whispering. At first, I thought it was imagination, exhaustion twisting my senses. But the whispers grew clearer, weaving into patterns. They weren't human voices, not exactly, but they carried the cadence of speech. Low, deliberate, layered, as though dozens of voices spoke at once beneath the current. I crouched, heart pounding, straining to catch meaning. The whispers rose and fell, repeating fragments. Some sounded like warnings, others like names. My name surfaced once, distorted, broken, carried on the ripple. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. The journal's words echoed in my mind. Names are doors. Don't open them. The creek was trying to open mine. The water shifted, rippling unnaturally, as though something beneath stirred. Shadows flickered across the surface, shapes that didn't belong. Elongated limbs, spirals, symbols. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, pressing against my ears until I thought my skull would split. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seeped through, vibrating in my bones. The forest wasn't just silent anymore. It was speaking through the water, bending nature into language. I backed away, stumbling onto the trail. The whispers followed, carried on the air, softer now but persistent. They weren't confined to the creek. They had attached themselves to me. By the time I reached the tower, the water's voice had faded, replaced by silence heavier than before. But I knew it hadn't ended. The forest had shown me another mouth, another way to speak. The creek wasn't just water. It was a conduit, a voice, a warning. And now it knew my name. The trail had always been there, a narrow strip of dirt winding through the pines, marked by faded signs and worn footprints. I had walked it countless times, each step familiar, each turn predictable. But that morning, when I set out to patrol, the path was gone. At first, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. The trees pressed closer, their trunks crowding together, branches weaving into a wall. I retraced my steps, scanning for the familiar bend, the clearing, the creek. Nothing. The forest had rearranged itself, erasing the trail as though it had never existed. I pressed forward, determined to find it again. My boots sank into soft soil, but the ground felt wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate, as if it had been freshly laid. The silence deepened, pressing against my ears, swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I stopped, heart pounding. The forest wasn't just hiding the path, it was consuming it. I pulled out the map, tracing the red lines, the forbidden zones, the safe routes. But the paper felt useless now. The forest didn't care about maps. It was rewriting itself, bending space, erasing landmarks. I turned back, desperate to return to the tower, but the way behind me had shifted too. The trees leaned closer, shadows stretched longer, and the trail dissolved into nothing. I was trapped in a labyrinth that hadn't existed moments before. Panic clawed at me. I called into the radio, voice trembling. "Tower 2, reporting, path missing." Static answered. No voices, no reassurance. The forest had cut me off again. I forced myself forward, stumbling through the undergrowth. Branches clawed at my arms, roots twisted beneath my feet. Every direction looked the same, endless trunks, endless shadows. The silence pressed harder, heavier, as though the forest was closing in. Then I saw it. A faint outline in the soil, a suggestion of footprints. I followed them, desperate, but they led nowhere. They ended abruptly, vanishing into smooth earth. I realized then that the forest wasn't just erasing paths, it was erasing presence. Trails, footprints, landmarks, all consumed, all forgotten. By the time I stumbled back into the clearing, the path reappeared, winding neatly through the trees as if nothing had changed. My chest heaved, sweat dripping, hands trembling. The forest had played with me, bending space, erasing reality, then restoring it. The vanishing path wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. The forest could take away more than trails. It could take away people, towers, voices. It could erase anything it chose. And once it erased you, there would be no way back. The fog rolled in without warning, thick and heavy, swallowing the clearing in pale gray. I had seen mist before, but this was different. It clung to the tower, seeped through the cracks, and muffled every sound until even my own breathing felt distant. At first, I thought it was natural. Yellowstone had its moods, its sudden shifts. But then I saw the light. A lantern glowed faintly in the fog, swaying as though carried by unseen hands. Its flame flickered, golden against the gray, but no figure held it. The light moved deliberately, weaving between the trees, pausing as if to listen. I leaned forward at the window, heart pounding. The lantern drifted closer, its glow cutting through the silence. I strained to see who carried it, but the fog thickened, hiding everything but the light itself. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind. It calls in voices you know. What if now it called in images? What if the forest had learned to lure me with sight instead of sound? The lantern stopped at the base of the tower. Its glow pulsed faintly, brighter, dimmer, brighter again, like a heartbeat. I backed away from the window, refusing to move closer. The silence pressed harder, heavier, as though the forest waited for me to descend. Then the light shifted. It rose slowly, impossibly, climbing the tower's side without a carrier. My chest tightened. The lantern wasn't being held. It was alive. The flame flickered violently, casting shadows across the walls. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in the glow. Eyes, mouths, twisted expressions. They vanished as quickly as they appeared, swallowed by the fog. I whispered into the radio, desperate. "Tower 2 reporting, strange light." Static answered. No voices, no reassurance. The forest had cut me off again. The lantern hovered outside the window, its glow pressing against the glass. I refused to look directly, but the light seeped into the room, painting the walls with spirals, symbols, shapes I had seen on the forbidden trail. My breath caught. The forest wasn't just speaking through sound, it was writing with light. I shut my eyes, refusing to see, refusing to let the forest know me. When I opened them again, the lantern was gone. The fog thinned, the silence eased, and the clearing returned to emptiness. But the walls of the tower still glowed faintly, symbols etched in light, fading slowly. The forest had shown me its lantern, and I understood then. It didn't need carriers. It didn't need voices. It could create its own lures, its own illusions, its own ways to reach me. The fog wasn't natural. The lantern wasn't real. They were the forest's language, another mouth, another trap. And next time, I might not be able to look away. The clearing had always been a place of relief, a break in the endless press of trees. But when I stepped into it that evening, the silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, no rustle of leaves, only stillness, thick and suffocating. At first, I thought it was natural, a lull in the forest's rhythm. But the longer I stood, the more wrong it felt. Silence here wasn't absence, it was presence. It pressed against my ears, heavy, deliberate, as though the clearing itself was listening. The grass lay flat, unnaturally uniform, as if something had swept across it. The trees surrounding the space leaned inward, their branches twisted like skeletal arms, forming a circle that felt less like nature and more like design. I crouched, scanning the ground. No footprints, no animal tracks, no signs of life. The soil was smooth, untouched, as though the clearing had erased everything that entered. Then I noticed the air. It didn't move. My breath hung in front of me, suspended, refusing to dissipate. I reached out, waving my hand, but the mist of exhalation lingered, frozen in place. The silence wasn't just soundless, it was motionless. I remembered the journal's words. The silence is its language. This was what it meant. The clearing wasn't empty, it was speaking. I strained to listen, heart pounding. The silence carried rhythm, faint pulses, like a heartbeat buried beneath stillness. Each pause felt deliberate, each absence measured. The forest wasn't quiet, it was communicating. My chest tightened. I whispered into the radio, desperate. Tower 2, reporting, clearing silent. Static answered, but even that felt muted, swallowed before it could exist. The silence deepened. My pulse thundered in my ears, but even that sound seemed stolen, clipped short, consumed. I realized then that the clearing wasn't just listening, it was erasing. I backed away, every step heavy, the silence pressing harder. The trees seemed to lean closer, the circle tightening. My breath still lingered in the air, suspended, refusing to fade. By the time I stumbled back onto the trail, sound returned suddenly. Birds calling, branches swaying, wind stirring. The silence broke like a snapped thread, leaving me gasping, trembling. I looked back once. The clearing stood unchanged, still, waiting. The forest had shown me its silent heart. And I understood then, silence wasn't emptiness. It was the forest's voice, its way of claiming, its way of erasing. The clearing wasn't a place to rest. It was a mouth, and I had stepped inside it. The compass had always been my anchor. No matter how twisted the trails became, no matter how heavy the silence pressed, its needle pointed north, steady and reliable. But that morning, when I pulled it from my pocket, the needle spun wildly. At first, I thought it was damaged. I tapped the glass, shook it gently, but the needle refused to settle. It circled endlessly, twitching, jerking, as though pulled by forces beneath the soil. I crouched on the trail, staring at the trembling arrow. The forest around me was still, yet the compass behaved as if caught in a storm. My chest tightened. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was interference. I remembered the journal's warnings. The rules are its traps. What if the compass was one of them? What if the forest had learned to bend direction itself? I tried walking, holding the compass steady. The needle spun faster, then froze, pointing not north, but directly into the forbidden trail. My breath caught. The forest wasn't guiding me, it was luring me. I turned sharply, forcing myself back toward the tower. The needle resisted, twitching violently, dragging itself back toward the forbidden path. My hand trembled, sweat dripping onto the glass. The silence pressed harder, heavier. Even the birds had vanished. Their fractured calls were placed by nothing. I realized then that the compass wasn't broken. It was possessed. The forest had claimed it, twisting it into another mouth, another lure. I shoved it back into my pocket, refusing to look, refusing to follow. But the weight of it burned against my leg, pulsing faintly, as though alive. Back in the tower, I placed it on the desk. The needle spun once, twice, then froze again, pointing not north, not south, but directly at me. My chest tightened. The forest didn't just want me lost, it wanted me claimed. I slammed the compass shut, locking it in the drawer. But even then, I could hear it faintly, the needle scraping against the glass, spinning endlessly in the silence. The sky had always been my one comfort. No matter how heavy the silence pressed, no matter how wrong the forest felt, the stars remained above, constant, untouchable, eternal. But that night, when I looked up, the sky was empty. At first, I thought clouds had rolled in, but the air was clear, the horizon sharp. The moon hung faintly, pale and thin, but the stars were gone. Not hidden, erased. The darkness above felt heavier than the forest below, a vast ceiling pressing down. I strained my eyes, desperate to find even a single point of light, but the void stretched endlessly. My chest tightened. The forest hadn't just claimed the ground, it had claimed the sky. The silence deepened, thicker than ever. Without the stars, the night felt endless, directionless. I pulled out the map, the compass, but both were useless. The compass needle spun violently. The map felt irrelevant. Without the stars, there was no north, no guidance, no escape. I whispered into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2, reporting, sky empty. Static answered, softer now, almost gentle, as though mocking me. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The rules are its traps. What if the stars had been rules too? What if the forest had erased them to remind me that nothing was beyond its reach? I stepped outside the tower, staring upward. The void pulsed faintly, darker in places, lighter in others, as though shapes moved across it. Shadows without stars, figures without form. My breath caught. The forest wasn't just erasing, it was replacing. Then I heard it. A faint hum, low and deliberate, carried on the air. It wasn't wind, it wasn't natural. It was rhythm, steady, pulsing, like the static patterns I had heard on the radio. The forest was speaking through the sky now, bending the void into language. I backed into the tower, heart pounding. The silence pressed harder, the hum vibrating through the walls, through my chest. I realized then that the night wasn't starless, it was alive. Hours passed, the void unbroken. No stars returned, no light pierced the darkness. The hum continued, steady, patient, waiting. By dawn, the stars flickered back, faint at first, then brighter, scattered across the sky as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. The forest had shown me its power. It could erase the heavens, bend the night, silence the stars. The night without stars wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. It began on the trail just after dusk. My boots pressed into the soil, each step deliberate, each sound swallowed quickly by the silence. But then I heard it. Another set of footsteps, faint, delayed, echoing mine. At first, I thought it was a trick of sound, the forest bouncing my movements back at me. But the rhythm was wrong. My stride was steady, yet the echo lagged, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, as though something unseen was mimicking me imperfectly. I stopped. The echo stopped too. The silence pressed harder, thicker, waiting. My pulse thundered in my ears. I took another step, softer this time. The echo followed, louder, heavier, as though the forest wanted me to know it was there. I whispered into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2, reporting, footsteps. Static answered, no voices, no reassurance. The forest had cut me off again. I crouched low, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, no shadows shifted. Yet the footsteps continued, circling, weaving, always just beyond sight. They weren't random. They were deliberate. The journal's words echoed in my mind. It waits for you to answer. What if the footsteps were the question? What if the forest was testing me, waiting for me to acknowledge its presence? I pressed forward, refusing to react. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, until they seemed to shake the ground. My chest tightened, breath shallow. I wanted to run, but I knew the forest would follow. Then the rhythm changed. The footsteps no longer echoed mine. They moved independently, circling, closing in. I spun, desperate to catch sight, but the trees stood still, shadows unbroken. The sound pressed closer, deliberate, patient. I backed toward the tower, every step mirrored by the echo. The silence between each strike was worse than the sound itself, a waiting, a listening. My skin prickled, my hands shook. By the time I reached the clearing, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I turned once, scanning the trail. Nothing. No prints, no movement, no presence. But I knew better. The forest had shown me another mouth, another way to speak. The echoing footsteps weren't just sound, they were language. The forest wasn't following me, it was imitating me, measuring me, claiming me. The tower had always felt like a fragile refuge, its wooden walls thin but comforting, its windows my only vantage point over the endless forest. Yet one night, those windows turned against me. It began with a faint reflection. I leaned forward to check the clearing, but instead of seeing the trees, I saw movement inside the glass. Not my own reflection, something else. A shadow leaned closer, tilting its head, watching me from within the pane. I staggered back, heart pounding. The window remained unchanged, the clearing outside still, but the sense of being observed pressed harder. The silence deepened, heavy, deliberate, as though the forest itself had shifted its gaze. I approached cautiously, eyes fixed on the glass. My reflection stared back, but its movements lagged, delayed by seconds. When I raised my hand, the figure in the window hesitated, then copied me imperfectly. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't reflecting me, it was imitating me. The journal's words echoed in my mind. It waits for you to answer. What if the windows were the question? What if the forest had found a way to watch me from inside my own refuge? I whispered into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2, reporting, windows wrong. Static answered, softer now, almost mocking. The reflection shifted again. Its eyes glowed faintly, not mine, not human. The figure leaned closer, pressing against the glass as though trying to step through. My breath caught. The tower wasn't safe anymore. I backed away, refusing to move closer, refusing to acknowledge. But the reflection followed, every step delayed, every gesture imperfect. It wasn't just watching, it was learning. Hours passed, the silence pressing harder. The reflection never vanished. It lingered, patient, waiting, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. By dawn, the figure dissolved, the window returned to normal. My reflection moved naturally again, the clearing outside unchanged. But the memory remained, heavy, unshakable. The tower windows had watched me. And I understood then. The forest didn't need to breach the door. It could reach me through glass, through silence, through imitation. The tower wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a cage, and the forest was watching from every side. The clock in the tower had always been my tether to time. Its steady ticking reassured me that the world outside the forest still moved forward, that hours passed, that dawn would eventually come. But one night, as the silence pressed harder than ever, the clock stopped. At first, I thought it was mechanical failure. The hands froze at midnight, the second hand suspended mid-movement. I tapped the glass, wound the gears, but nothing shifted. The tower remained still, the silence absolute. I checked my watch, desperate for confirmation. Its hands had stopped too. My chest tightened. Time itself had stalled. The forest outside seemed unchanged, yet the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the world had paused. I whispered into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2 reporting, clock stopped. Static answered, softer now, almost deliberate, as though mocking me. I stared at the frozen hands, the silence pressing harder. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes. What if time was one of its rules? What if the forest had claimed it too? Minutes, or what should have been minutes, stretched endlessly. The night refused to move forward. The moon hung in place, shadows frozen, the silence unbroken. I realized then that the forest wasn't just erasing paths, voices, stars. It was erasing time itself. I paced the tower, desperate to feel movement, to prove the world still turned. But every step felt suspended, every breath clipped short, consumed before it could fade. My body moved, but the air refused to acknowledge it. The silence deepened, pressing against my chest. I thought I heard faint ticking, distant, buried beneath the stillness. I followed the sound, searching, but it led nowhere. The forest was taunting me, offering fragments of time it had already stolen. I sat at the desk, staring at the frozen clock. My reflection in the glass seemed delayed, lagging, as though even my image had been trapped. My pulse thundered, but even that rhythm felt wrong, slower, heavier, as though the forest had synchronized me to its stillness. Hours, or what should have been hours, passed. The clock remained frozen, the silence absolute. I realized then that the forest didn't need to move forward. It could hold me here forever, suspended in its language, erased from time. When dawn finally broke, the clock ticked once, then resumed, its hands jerking forward as though nothing had happened. My watch followed, the second hand racing to catch up. The forest released me, time restored. But I knew better. The forest hadn't malfunctioned. It had shown me its power. It could stop time, bend it, erase it. The clock stopping wasn't a failure. It was a warning. The forest didn't just own silence, paths, or stars. It owned time. And once it decided to stop, nothing could move again. It began with a whisper, faint and brittle, carried through the silence like wind through a broken flute. At first, I thought it was the creek again, murmuring its strange cadence. But the sound was different, emptier, thinner, as though the air itself had been hollowed out. The voices rose slowly, layered, overlapping, yet none carried weight. They were echoes without origin, words without breath. Each syllable cracked, fragile, dissolving before it could fully form. My chest tightened. These weren't imitations of people I knew. They were something worse. Voices stripped of identity, hollow shells of language. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound seeped through, vibrating in my bones. The hollow voices weren't outside. They were inside, filling the silence, pressing against thought itself. I whispered into the radio, desperate. Tower 2 reporting, voices. Static answered, softer now, almost mocking. The forest had cut me off again. The voices grew louder, weaving into patterns. They spoke fragments, half sentences, broken words, syllables repeated endlessly. Some sounded like prayers, others like warnings, but none carried meaning. They were language emptied of purpose, sound without soul. I remembered the journal's words. It waits for you to answer. But how could I answer emptiness? How could I respond to voices that weren't alive? The silence pressed harder, heavier. The hollow voices circled, rising and falling, until they formed rhythm. My pulse matched their cadence, my breath synchronized, as though the forest was pulling me into its hollow chorus. I staggered to the window, scanning the clearing. Shadows flickered, shapes moved, but no figure spoke. The voices had no mouths, no bodies. They were the forest itself, bending air into imitation. Then I heard my name. Not spoken clearly, but fractured, hollow, broken into syllables. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't just speaking, it was erasing. It was stripping voices of identity, hollowing them until nothing remained but sound. I backed away, refusing to respond, refusing to give it what it wanted. The voices grew frantic, louder, overlapping, pressing harder. My skull throbbed, my vision blurred. I thought I might collapse under the weight of emptiness. And then, suddenly, silence. The voices vanished, leaving the air heavy, the tower trembling. My breath came ragged, my hands shaking. The hollow voices hadn't been random. They had been deliberate. The forest had shown me another mouth, another way to speak. The voices weren't alive. They weren't human. They were hollow. And I understood then. The forest didn't need meaning. It only needed sound. I found it at dawn, when the mist still clung low to the ground. The clearing looked ordinary at first. Flat soil, ringed by trees leaning inward like conspirators. But at its center stood something impossible, a mirror. It was tall, framed in iron that had rusted into spirals, its surface flawless, untouched by dust or weather. No ranger had placed it there. No trail markers explained it. The forest had delivered it, deliberate, waiting. I approached cautiously, boots crunching against the soil. My reflection stared back, but wrong. The movements lagged, delayed by seconds, as though the mirror wasn't reflecting me, but studying me. My chest tightened. I raised my hand. The reflection hesitated, then copied me imperfectly, its fingers bending at unnatural angles. My breath caught. This wasn't a mirror. It was a mouth. The silence pressed harder, heavier. I remembered the journal's words. It waits for you to answer. What if the mirror was the question? I leaned closer, eyes locked on the glass. My reflection's eyes glowed faintly, not mine, not human. Its mouth opened slowly, though mine remained shut. A sound seeped through, low, hollow, fractured, like the voices I had heard before. I staggered back, refusing to respond. The reflection tilted its head, disappointed, patient. The silence deepened, pressing against my chest, vibrating through the clearing. Then the mirror shifted. Its surface rippled, shadows flickering across it. For a moment, I saw faces, rangers, strangers, people I had known, each one staring, each one silent. They dissolved quickly, swallowed by the glass. I whispered into the radio, desperate. Tower 2 reporting, mirror. Static answered, softer now, almost mocking. The reflection leaned closer, pressing against the glass as though trying to step through. My pulse thundered, my breath shallow. I realized then that the mirror wasn't showing me. It was showing what the forest wanted me to become. I backed away, refusing to look, refusing to acknowledge. The silence pressed harder, the clearing trembling faintly. My skin prickled, my hands shook. By the time I stumbled back onto the trail, the mirror was gone. The clearing stood empty, soil smooth, trees silent. But the memory remained, heavy, unshakable. The forest had shown me its mirror, and I understood then. It didn't need doors or voices or footsteps. It could reach me through reflection, through imitation, through silence. The mirror wasn't a warning, it was a promise. One day, when the forest decided, I would step inside. It began just after midnight, when the silence was at its heaviest. A single knock echoed through the tower, sharp and deliberate, rattling the wood. I froze, pen hovering above the logbook, ears straining. Then it came again. Knock. Steady, patient, measured. Not frantic, not violent, just persistent. I crept toward the door, each step deliberate, careful not to make noise. The silence outside was absolute, yet the knocking continued, rhythmic, purposeful. It wasn't random. Something was testing the barrier. I pressed my palm against the wood. The vibrations pulsed through it, steady, like a heartbeat. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't trying to break in. It was trying to be acknowledged. The journal's words echoed in my mind. Never answer when it calls. What if the knock was the call? I backed away, refusing to respond. The knocking grew louder, sharper, shaking the hinges, pressing against the lock. My breath caught, my pulse thundered. I whispered into the radio, desperate. Tower 2, reporting, knocking. Static answered, softer now, almost mocking. Minutes stretched into eternity. The knocking never stopped. It paused, then resumed, steady, patient, endless. Each silence between strikes was worse than the sound itself, a waiting, a listening. I thought of the veteran ranger, his unfinished sentence. The forest is... Had he heard the knock too? Had he opened the door? The silence pressed harder, heavier. The knocking grew frantic, overlapping, as though multiple hands pressed against the wood. My skull throbbed, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream, but I knew better. To answer was to surrender. Hours passed, the knocking unbroken. My body trembled, my breath shallow, my mind fraying. I realized then that the forest didn't need to breach the door. It only needed persistence. It only needed patience. By dawn, the knocking stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. The door stood intact, the lock unbroken. But the wood bore marks, thin grooves etched into its surface, spiraling patterns like those I had seen on the forbidden trail. I touched them, and the wood felt warm, as though something had pressed against it all night. The endless knock wasn't a threat, it was a ritual. The forest didn't want to enter, it wanted me to open. The towers had always been my reassurance. Scattered across the forest, their faint lights blinked through the night, proof that I wasn't alone. Each one a sentinel, each one a reminder that others were watching too. But one evening, as the silence pressed harder than ever, the towers began to vanish. It started with Tower 4. Its light flickered faintly, then dimmed, then disappeared altogether. I stared across the clearing, waiting for it to return, but the horizon remained dark. I whispered into the radio, desperate. Tower 2 reporting, Tower 4 light gone. Static answered, softer now, almost mocking. Minutes later, Tower 6 vanished. Its glow dissolved into the tree line, leaving only shadow. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't just erasing paths, voices, or stars. It was erasing the towers themselves. I scanned the horizon, heart pounding. One by one, the lights dimmed, flickered, then vanished. The silence deepened with each disappearance, pressing harder, heavier, until the night felt endless. I remembered the journal's words, "The forest doesn't forgive mistakes." What if the towers weren't structures at all? What if they were illusions, fragile defenses the forest had tolerated until now? I called again into the radio, voice trembling. Tower 2 reporting, towers missing. Static answered, no voices, no reassurance. The forest had cut me off completely. The horizon grew darker, emptier. My tower stood alone, its light flickering faintly, the silence pressing harder. I realized then that the forest wasn't just erasing presence, it was erasing connection. I leaned against the window, scanning desperately. For a moment, I thought I saw Tower 3's light return, faint and distant. Relief surged until I realized it wasn't a tower. It was the lantern I had seen before, swaying in the fog, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. My chest tightened. The forest wasn't restoring the towers, it was replacing them. By dawn, the horizon stood empty. No towers, no lights, no signals. My radio remained silent, the static softer, almost gone. The forest had claimed them all. I understood then. The towers weren't disappearing. They were being consumed. folded into the forest silence, erased from memory. And soon, mine would vanish too. The forest had spoken in silence, in voices, in mirrors, and vanished towers. Each warning was not random, it was deliberate, a language built from erasure, imitation, and persistence. I had seen paths dissolve, clocks stop, stars vanish, and voices hollowed into emptiness. The forest was not simply alive, it was aware. It did not need to chase, it did not need to strike, it only needed to wait. Every knock, every whisper, every reflection was a test, a lure, a reminder that the rules we cling to, time, direction, presence, were fragile illusions. The forest could bend them, break them, erase them. And once erased, nothing returned the same. I understood then that survival was not about strength or courage. It was about silence, about refusing to answer when it called, about resisting the temptation to acknowledge its language, because acknowledgement was surrender. But even as I write these words, I feel its presence pressing harder, heavier, waiting. The clearing outside is still, the tower walls trembling faintly. My breath lingers too long in the air. The radio hums softly, static pulsing in rhythm. The forest is speaking again. And I know this truth. It will not stop. It will not forgive. It will not forget. The forest is patient, and it is watching. If you follow this journey through silence and imitation, you already know the danger of acknowledgement. But the story doesn't end here. The forest's language is spreading, through sound, through reflection, through memory. Do not ignore the signs. Every silence, every flicker, every echo may be more than coincidence. Do not answer when it calls. Names are doors, and once opened, they cannot be closed. Do not trust what you see. Mirrors, lanterns, footsteps, each is a lure, each is a trap. Do not believe you are safe. Towers vanish, clocks stop, stars fade. The forest owns more than ground. It owns time, sky, and silence. And if you want to know how deep this language goes, if you want to see what happens when the forest finally speaks in full, then stay with us, because the next chapter is already waiting.